Sairam students, welcome. Are you all ready today? So, let us continue with history. Lesson number 4, what books and burials tell us. In our previous class, we had learnt about how historians study the Rig Veda. That is, some historians, like the archaeologists, they find out about the past with the help of material remains, as well as they examine the written sources, and they found out that some of the hymns in the Rig Veda, they are written in the form of dialogues, and one such part of the hymn was a dialogue between sage Vishwamitra and two rivers Byas and Satluj. And we had learnt about cattle, horses and chariots. That is, there are many prayers in the Rig Veda for cattle and for children, especially for sons, and horses. And the horses, they were yoked to the chariots that were used in the battles, which were fought to capture cattle, land, water, and to capture people. And the wealth that was obtained was kept by the leaders, and sometimes it was given to the priests and the people, and some wealth it was used for the performance of yagyas or sacrifices that were meant for gods and goddesses. And the offerings, it included ghee, grain, and in some cases animals. And there was no regular army, and most of the men, they took part in wars, and they had the assemblies where the people, they met and they discussed the matters of war and peace, and they also chose the leaders who were often brave and skillful warriors. And we learnt about words to describe people. That is, there are two groups of people in terms of their work: priests or the Brahmins and the Rajas. And there are two words which were used to refer to the people or the community as a whole: Jana and Vish. The word Vaishya, it comes from Vish. And the people who composed the hymns, they described themselves as Aryas, and they called their opponents as Dasas or Dasyus. And later, these Dasas, they were meant as the slaves, and these slaves, they were captured in the wars, and they were treated as the property of the owners, who could make them do whatever work they wanted. And we learnt about silent sentinels, the story of the megaliths. That is, the megaliths, they literally means the big stones, and they were used to mark the burial sites. And its practice, it began about 3000 years ago, and it was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, in the northeast, and Kashmir. And the dead, they were buried with distinctive pots, which are called black and red ware. And they also found tools and weapons of iron, and sometimes skeletons of horses, horse equipments, and ornaments of stone and gold. Today, let us continue to learn about finding out about social difference, and were some burial spots meant for certain families, a special burial at Inamgaon, and what skeletal studies tell us. And we shall learn about occupations at Inamgaon and elsewhere, that is about China. Now let us begin with finding out about social differences. That is, the archaeologists, they thought that objects that were found with the skeleton probably belonged to the dead person, and sometimes they found that more objects were there in one grave than in another. That means the dead people, they were buried with many objects, and the archaeologists, they are of the view that these objects probably belonged to the dead person. Do you know, children, that in Brahmagiri, the archaeologists, they found one skeleton that was buried with many things. That is, it was buried with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and with 1 conch shell. So many objects were buried with that person. And the other skeletons, they had only a few pots. That is, they found out that there was some difference in status amongst the people that were buried. That means some were rich, others were poor, some were chiefs, and others might be the followers. So the archaeologists concluded that the people, they were buried with the objects depending upon their status. Now let us learn the next topic, that is, were some burial spots meant for certain families? That means the archaeologists, they sometimes found that the megaliths, they contain more than one skeleton, and these indicated that the people, perhaps they were belonging to the same family and were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. And the bodies of those who died later, they were brought into the grave through the portholes. That means the people of the same family, they were buried at the same place when they died, though not at the same time. How did they come to know about the burial sites? So for that, the stone circles or the boulders, they placed on the surface, probably that served as the signposts to find the burial site, so that the people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. So what did they do? They made the stone circles or the boulders, and it served as a signpost. So here you can see in the images, these megaliths, they served as the signposts to find the burial site. Now let us learn the new topic, that is about a special burial at Inamgaon. Children, if you find Inamgaon on map 2, that is given on page number 14, you will see that Inamgaon, it is a Chalcolithic site. What do you mean by Chalcolithic? Chalcolithic means during which some weapons and tools were made of copper. And this period was still largely Neolithic in character. So where is Inamgaon situated? Inamgaon, it is a site on the river God, a tributary of the Bhima. And when was it occupied? It was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago. Here the adults were generally buried in the ground. That is, they were laid out straight with the head towards the north. So how were the adults generally buried there? They were generally buried in the ground, laid out straight with the head facing towards the north. And sometimes the burials were within the houses, and the vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. So which vessels were placed with the dead? The vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. And it was found that one man was buried in a large 4-legged clay jar in the courtyard of a 5-roomed house, that is in one of the largest houses at the site, that was in the center of the settlement. And this house, it also had a granary, and the body, it was placed in a cross-legged position. So what was found in the 4-legged clay jar in the courtyard? One man, he was found buried in a large 4-legged clay jar in the courtyard. And how many rooms were there in this house? There were 5 rooms in this house. That means it was one of the largest houses at the site. And what did it have? It also had a granary. And how was the body placed? The body was placed in a cross-legged position. Now let us learn about what skeletal studies tell us. That means by seeing the skeleton, how did they come to know about it? That is, it is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. And there are no major differences in the bones of a girl and a boy. So, how could they make out whether a skeleton was that of a man or a woman? So, what did they do? Sometimes the people, they decided on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. For example, if a skeleton is found with jewelry, that means it is sometimes thought to be that of a woman. However, we know that some men, they also wore ornaments. So, there were problems with this. And the better way of figuring out the skeleton was to look at the bone structure, that is the hip or the pelvic area of the woman. It is generally larger to enable childbearing. So, with the help of it, they could understand the skeleton is of a man or a woman. And these distinctions, they are based on modern skeletal studies. And about 2000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. Who was Charaka? Charaka was a famous physician. And what did he do? He wrote a book on medicine that was known as the Charaka Samhita. There he states that the human body has 360 bones, and this is a much larger number than the 200 bones that are recognized in modern anatomy. Children, how many bones does an adult have? An adult has 206 bones. And Charaka, how did he arrive at this figure? Charaka, he arrived at this figure by counting the teeth, joints and cartilage. Now let us learn about occupations at Inamgaon. That is, the people, they followed various occupations at Inamgaon. The archaeologists, they found out that some of them were agriculturalists. And how did they find out that they were the agriculturalists? They found the seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas and sesame, and bones of a number of animals, many bearing cut marks that show they may have been used as food, have also been found. That means the cut marks on the bones of some animals suggest that a few of these animals may have been used as food by the people of Inamgaon. That means some people were hunter-gatherers and some others were pastoralists. That means the bones of several animals such as cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, black buck, antelope, hare and mongoose. Besides birds, crocodile, turtle, crab and fish also have been found. And there is evidence that fruits such as bear, amla, jamun, dates and a variety of berries were collected by these people. So these were the various occupations that were followed by the people at Inamgaon. Now let us learn elsewhere, that is about China. Children, find China in your atlas. Do you know that around 3500 years ago, some of the first evidence of writing was found in China, and these writings were on animal bones and were called as oracle bones. Why? Because they were used to predict the future. That is, the kings, they got the scribes to write questions on the bones. What were the questions? They would ask them to write about would they win battles, would the harvest be good, would they have sons, and then the bones, they were put into the fire and they cracked because of the heat of the fire. Then the fortune tellers, they used to study these cracks and they used to try to predict the future. And as you may expect, they sometimes made mistakes also. And these kings, they used to live in the palaces, in the cities, and they amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not know the use of iron. So the kings, with the help of the oracle bones, they would come to know about their future with the help of the fortune tellers who used to try to predict the future for the kings. And where did these kings live? These kings, they lived in the palaces that were in the cities, and they amassed vast quantities of wealth. That is, they gathered together or accumulated the vast quantities of wealth, and it also included large and elaborately decorated bronze vessels, but they did not know the use of iron. So children, you can list out one difference between the Raja of the Rig Veda and the kings of China, and you can note it down in your notebook. Now children, let us do a quick recap of the topics that we have learned today. Today we learnt about finding out about social differences. That is, how do megaliths show that there were social differences. So sometimes the archaeologists, they found more objects in one grave than in another. This indicates that people were buried according to their social status. And in Brahmagiri, a skeleton was found with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and a conch shell, whereas other skeletons have only a few pots. And these findings suggest that there was some difference in status amongst the people who were buried. And we learnt about were some burial spots meant for certain families. That means the people belonging to the same family, they were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. And they were brought into the grave through the portholes. And the stone circles or boulders that were placed on the surface, they probably served as the signposts to find the burial site, so that people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. And we learned about a special burial at Inamgaon. That is, it is a site on the river God, a tributary of the Bhima. Here the adults were generally buried in the ground. That is, they were laid out straight and their head was facing towards the north. And sometimes the burials, they were within the houses. And the vessels that probably contained food and water, they were placed with the dead. And we learnt about what skeletal studies tell us. That is, it is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. And sometimes people, they decided on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. And a better way of figuring out the skeleton is to look at the bone structure. And these distinctions, they are based on modern skeletal studies. And about 2000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. And he stated that the human body has 360 bones. And Charaka, he arrived at this figure by counting the teeth, joints and cartilage. And we learnt about occupations at Inamgaon. That is, here people followed various occupations and some of them were agriculturists. That is, the archaeologists, they have found seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas and sesame. And bones of several animals are also found. And there is evidence that these people, they collected fruits such as bear, amla, jamun, dates and a variety of berries. And we also learnt about elsewhere, that is about China. Around 3500 years ago, we find some of the first evidence of writing in China, and these writings were on animal bones. These are called as oracle bones because they were used to predict the future. And the kings, they got the scribes to write questions on the bones, and these kings, they lived in palaces, in cities. and amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not know the use of iron. Children, we have completed with this lesson today. I hope you have understood the topics that we have learnt. So, read the lesson thoroughly and see you soon in the next class. Till then, goodbye children.